You're in the wrong building, buddy. This is for real cops, not rental cops. Without slowing down, Officer Trent Maddox flipped a creamer cup over the man's head. White liquid ran down his hair as laughter exploded from the window table. In the doorway, Sergeant Vance Ramsey watched with a satisfied smile. Captain Rowan Hale, the man at the table, didn't move. He didn't flinch or raise his voice. Instead, he quietly reached for a napkin and wiped his face with the unhurried calm of someone who had already decided exactly how this was going to end. The laughter only grew louder. They mistook his calmness for weakness. But what nobody in that cafeteria understood was that they had just humiliated the man who held every single one of their careers in his hands. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. It always did. Nobody complained. Complaining wasn't something you did at the Ninth Precinct. Not if you were smart. Not if you wanted your shift assignments to stay the way they were. Sergeant Vance Ramsey stood at the center of the room like he owned it, because he did. He leaned against the counter with his coffee mug in one hand, the other tucked in his belt, and he talked loud and easy, the kind of man who never once wondered whether people actually wanted to hear what he had to say. Officers Maddox, Carver, and Holt sat around the break room table. 3 other officers stood near the door. They all laughed at the right moments. They all nodded when nodding was expected. They had learned the way you learn things in a place like this, that keeping Vance Ramsey happy was simply how you survived. Vance Ramsey was a man with a thick neck, a permanent smirk, and the particular confidence of someone who had never once faced a real consequence. He wasn't the captain of the Ninth Precinct. His name had never appeared on that door, but everybody from the newest rookie to the oldest desk sergeant understood the truth of this building. Vance Ramsey ran it. Captain Dale Whitaker had retired. Good old Dale, who never rocked the boat, never asked uncomfortable questions, and never once told Ramsey no. In the period since Dale walked out the door, Ramsey had made himself right at home in the power vacuum. He'd started deciding shift assignments personally. He'd overridden HR memos without explanation. He had taken to referring to himself casually and often as acting captain. He had no such designation. He didn't seem to care. "You know what Dale's problem was?" Ramsey said, swirling his coffee. "No backbone. The man couldn't discipline a parking meter." He paused for the laugh. "Got it." Brent Carver nearly choked. Maddox grinned and leaned back in his chair like he didn't have a worry in the world. Trent Maddox was built wide and mean, the kind of young officer who hadn't grown into himself yet, and probably never would. He had found Ramsey early in his career and attached himself like something that doesn't let go. Ramsey liked having Maddox around. He was useful that way. Brent Carver was older, red face, the bitterness baked so deep into him that it had stopped looking like bitterness and started looking like personality. He believed in the marrow of his bones that his years of service entitled him to say and do exactly as he pleased. Lacey Holt sat at the end of the table and laughed along quietly. She learned early that laughing along was the only way to avoid becoming the subject of the joke. "New captain starts today," said a duty officer, passing through the doorway, not stopping, not making eye contact. Ramsey didn't miss a beat. "Yeah." He waved a hand like he was shooing a fly. "I know." He had done his homework on Rowan Hale the same way he did his homework on all of them. Pulled the file, read it twice, looked for the weaknesses. State-level transfer, administrative background, no street experience, no precinct relationships, no history in Harrow City, diversity hire. Ramsey had decided, plain and simple. He'd seen the type before. All paperwork and politics, no real authority, No idea how a precinct like this one actually functioned. They always came in wanting to change things. They always left tired and beaten, wondering what had hit them. The Ninth had eaten several captains over the years. Ramsay had helped with every single one. State-level desk job, he continued, his voice warm with amusement. Man hasn't worked a real shift in years. Probably doesn't even know how to fill out an incident report without his secretary doing it for him. The room laughed again. Carver leaned forward. How long you got give him? Ramsay thought about it for a moment. 6 months, if he's tough, he smiled. He won't be tough. He raised his coffee mug toward the center of the room. A toast, slow and deliberate, the kind that said, nothing changes here, not today, not ever. Maddox raised his own cup. Carver followed. Even Holt lifted hers just slightly. The fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly in the quiet. Somewhere behind them, through the building's side entrance, a door opened and closed with barely a sound. Nobody noticed. Nobody turned around. Rowan Hale had been watching men like Vance Ramsey his entire career. He knew how they moved. He knew how they laughed. He knew the particular way they held a room, loud and loose and completely sure of themselves, right up until the moment everything fell apart. He stepped through the precinct's side entrance and let the door close quietly behind him. He was not wearing his uniform. No gold bars, no captain's insignia, no pressed navy blues that would have announced him the moment he walked in. Instead, he wore plain khaki trousers, a dark polo shirt, and a small generic patch on his left shoulder that read Port Security Unit in plain black letters. The kind of thing you'd see on a contract worker. The kind of thing that made people's eyes slide right past you. That was exactly the point. He picked up a tray at the cafeteria line, chose scrambled eggs and toast, poured himself a black coffee, and carried everything to a steel table near the far wall. He sat down. He opened a small notebook beside his tray. He picked up his fork, and then he simply watched. Deputy Chief Valerie Kane had pushed a thick folder across her desk without a word. Rowan had opened it and read every page while she waited. Dismissed complaints, officers who requested transfers rather than fight, a paper trail full of holes where real records should have been. And then there was Darius Reed, outstanding academy record, assigned to the Ninth full of purpose, the worst patrol routes in the district, written up for things white officers did freely, gone. 2-sentence resignation letter, and a man who boxed up his uniform and tried to forget everything. Rowan closed the folder slowly and looked up. Kane hadn't touched her coffee since he walked in. Tell me about him, Rowan said. Not the file. Tell me what the file doesn't say. She looked at the window briefly, then back at him. Vance Ramsey is not stupid. That's the first thing you need to understand. He looks like a loud, small man, and that makes people underestimate him. They stop paying attention. That's exactly what he wants. She folded her hands on the desk. He has spent his career building a network inside that precinct. Officers who owe him favors. Officers who are afraid of him. Officers who have done things they don't want anyone examining too closely. He holds all of it right here. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple. What about outside the precinct? Victor Langston, she said the name like a headache that wouldn't quit. City councilman chairs the police funding committee. Any formal action against Ramsay that makes noise at the city level gets complicated very fast. How complicated? Several captains over the years is complicated. She held his gaze. He will not come at you directly. That's not how he works. He'll bury you in paperwork. He'll go to the union. He'll use Langston to make noise in the press. And he'll stand in the middle of all of it with clean hands and that smile of his. She paused. He has done it before. Darius Reed, Rowan said quietly. Something shifted in her expression, just slightly. Darius Reed had more potential than anyone we put through the ninth in a decade. He's working at an auto parts store now. Won't return my calls. The room was very quiet. Rowan looked at the folder one last time. Then he looked up. Give me 1 week. Now he sat in their cafeteria eating their eggs, taking the measure of everything around him. He was broad-shouldered, settled, with the particular stillness of a man who had long ago made peace with difficulty and stopped flinching at it. Years on the job, years of those on a federal task force where impatience got people killed. He worked methodically, badge numbers against faces memorized from personnel files. Who deferred to whom? Who sat alone? Who laughed too hard and who laughed too carefully? The loud table by the windows confirmed everything. Maddox, Carver, Holt. The architecture of the problem was already visible. The ringleaders, the followers, the one who laughed but wasn't really laughing. He wrote quietly in his notebook. Facts, names, nothing dramatic. He took a sip of coffee. He was perfectly still in the way that very calm, very dangerous people are still. Not passive, not idle, but coiled, patient, waiting for exactly what he knew was coming. He was almost finished with his breakfast when the air in the room shifted. A chair scraped back from the window table. Trent Maddox stood up, nudged Carver, and tilted his head toward Rowan's table. Somebody let the security guard into our cafeteria, he said. The table laughed. Rowan kept eating. Trent Maddox didn't walk over to start a fight. That wasn't the point. The point was the audience. The point was the officers at the window table watching him cross the cafeteria with that loose, easy grin on his face. The point was Vance Ramsey standing in the doorway with his coffee, watching the whole thing with quiet approval. Maddox was the kind of man who needed witnesses. His cruelty didn't feel real to him unless someone was watching. He reached the condiment station beside Rowan's table. He didn't say anything at first. He just picked up a small metal creamer cup, the kind with a foil peel tab on top, and held it loosely between 2 fingers, casual, like he just grabbed it on his way past. Rowan had his fork raised halfway to his mouth. Maddox peeled back the foil tab, and he turned the cup upside down over Rowan's head and poured it slow, deliberate, every single drop. The table by the windows exploded. Carver slapped the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. 2 officers behind him doubled over. Holt pressed her hand over her mouth, not out of shock, out of the effort of containing how hard she was laughing. One young officer near the door turned away, shoulders shaking. Ramsay, still in the doorway, did nothing. He just smiled. Rowan went completely still. Not the stillness of a man in shock. Not the stillness of someone afraid. It was a different kind of stillness altogether. Deep, deliberate, and somehow more unsettling than any reaction could have been. His fork stayed in his hand. His eyes stayed on his tray. He set the fork down. He reached out and pulled a paper napkin from the dispenser beside his tray. He brought it to his face. He wiped the creamer from his forehead, from his cheek, from the side of his neck. Slowly, carefully, the way a man wipes his hands clean after finishing a job. The laughter was still going. Maddox stood over him, grinning wide, looking back at the table to make sure everyone was still watching. They were. He leaned down toward Rowan. Close. You're in the wrong cafeteria, buddy. This is for department personnel, not rent-a-cops. More laughter. Rowan finished wiping his face. He folded the napkin in half and set it beside his tray, and then he looked up at Maddox. Not with anger, not with embarrassment, with something far quieter than either of those things. He looked at the badge on Maddox's chest, read the name printed on it, and then he looked directly into Maddox's eyes. I know, he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Enjoy your breakfast, Officer Maddox. The grin on Maddox's face flickered us for a second, just the briefest hesitation, like a man who hears a sound he can't quite identify. He hadn't told this man his name. The patch on his chest, said Maddox, but that wasn't something a security guard would normally read. Not like that. Not casually. Not with that kind of ease. But the moment passed. The table was still laughing. Maddox straightened up, looked back at his audience, and spread his hands wide. See nothing. He sauntered back toward the window table and dropped into his chair like a man who had just done something worth doing. Ramsay pushed off the doorframe and disappeared back into the hallway, satisfied. The cafeteria noise filled back in around Rowan like water closing over a stone. He sat for a moment, still quiet. His breakfast sat in front of him, cooling now. He didn't look around the room. He didn't track the laughter. He didn't watch Maddox settle back in among his friends and replay the moment for the ones who missed the best angle. He reached into the pocket of his polo shirt and pulled out his small notebook. He opened it to a fresh page. He wrote one name, Maddox. He looked at it for a moment. Then he capped his pen and slipped the notebook back into his pocket. Across the cafeteria, near the far windows on the opposite side of the room from the loud table, Officer Brooke Langley sat alone with a cup of coffee. She hadn't drunk. She had watched the whole thing without moving. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't looking away either. She was watching Rowan with a focused, careful expression, the look of someone trying to solve a problem they don't yet have all the pieces to. Rowan picked up his fork again. He felt her watching. He glanced up briefly and met her eyes across the room. Neither of them said a word. He looked back down at his breakfast and kept eating. The briefing room filled up the way it always did, loud near the door, quieter toward the back. The window table crew, Maddox, Carver, Holt claimed the same 3 seats they always claimed. Center left, close enough to the front to look engaged without actually being engaged. Coffee cups scraped against the long table. Someone's radio crackled and was turned down. The usual low current of side conversations ran around the room like water, finding its level. Nobody paid much attention to the man already standing at the front. He was in the same polo shirt from the cafeteria, the same plain khaki trousers, the port security unit patch on his left shoulder. He stood with both hands loose at his sides, not moving, not checking his phone, not doing anything in particular, just standing there in the quiet way that certain people stand, taking up exactly the space they need, and not 1 inch more. Maddox glanced at him and looked away. He leaned towards Carver. Why is the security contractor in our briefing? Carver shrugged without interest. Probably hear about the parking lot cameras. Just ignore him. Maddox did. The room kept filling. A few officers threw a second glance at the man near the podium and arrived at the same easy conclusion. Maintenance, contractor, building services. Someone from Fleet and moved on. It was the polo shirt that did it. The absence of a real uniform. People see what they expect to see, and nobody at the Ninth Precinct expected anything that morning except the same thing they got every morning. Ramsay came through the door with minutes to spare. He did a brief scan of the room the way he always did, checking attendance, checking posture, confirming the order of things, and his eyes moved across the man at the front without stopping. He set his coffee down. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table. He was just about to sit when the door opened again. The room changed immediately, not because of a sound or a word. It changed the way a room changes when someone walks in who outranks everyone present. A quiet, involuntary shift, like a current running beneath the floor. Side conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone straightened in their chair. Someone else put their phone face down. Deputy Chief Valerie Kane walked to the front of the room in full dress uniform, shoulders back, eyes forward, and stood beside the man in the polo shirt. Ramsay's hand was still on the back of his chair. He didn't sit down. Kane did not look at him. She did not look at anyone in particular. She stood and waited, and the waiting itself was a kind of pressure, clean and steady, and completely controlled. She had clearly done this before. She was clearly not in a hurry. The room reached full silence. Maddox's eyes moved to the man beside her, back to Kane, back to the man again. He found himself looking more carefully this time at the way he stood, at the particular quality of his stillness, at the fact that he was meeting nobody's gaze because he didn't need to, because he was completely, entirely unbothered by any of this. Something cold moved through Maddox's chest. He thought about the cafeteria, the creamer cup, the way the man had looked up at him, not scared, not embarrassed, just steady, the way he had said, Officer Maddox, like he had always known the name, like it was already filed somewhere inside him, already recorded. Enjoy your breakfast, Officer Maddox. Maddox's jaw tightened. Carver leaned forward slightly in his seat, elbows on the table. Holt had both hands wrapped around her coffee cup and was staring at the surface of the table. Ramsay stood very still beside his chair. Kane let the silence run exactly as long as she wanted it to. Then she spoke. Officers of the Ninth Precinct. Her voice was unhurried and clear, the voice of a woman who had never once needed to repeat herself. I'll keep this brief. She turned slightly toward the man beside her. After a thorough selection process conducted over the past period, the Ninth Precinct has a new commanding officer effective as of this morning. She paused one beat. 2. Captain Rowan Hale, years of distinguished service, former liaison to the FBI Organized Crime Task Force, Department Commendations for Integrity in command. She let that land. Many of you, she continued, and something in her tone shifted just slightly, not warmer exactly, but more deliberate, have already had the opportunity to meet him this morning. Her eyes moved briefly, almost imperceptibly toward the window table group. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. This one had weight. It pressed down on specific people and pressed down hard. Maddox felt the blood leave his face. Carver's jaw went slack. Holt looked up from the table and then immediately looked back down. Ramsay said nothing, did nothing. His expression had stopped being an expression and had become something else. A careful, rigid blankness. The face of a man performing composure while the floor dropped out beneath him. Kane stepped to the side. I'll let him take it from here. Rowan Hale walked to the podium. He moved without urgency. He set both hands on the edges of the stand and looked out over the room. He did not look like a man who had just been revealed. He looked like a man who had simply been waiting for the right moment to step forward, and the moment had arrived exactly on schedule. He found Maddox first, held his gaze for 2 long seconds, then Carver, then Holt, then last and longest, Vance Ramsey. Nobody in the room made a sound. Good morning, Rowan said. I've already had a chance to get acquainted with some of you. He let that sentence stand alone for just a moment. I look forward to getting to know all of you properly over the coming days. He didn't smile. He opened the folder in front of him and moved directly into the briefing. Shift assignments, patrol route updates, 2 pending case reviews. He was thorough and precise and completely at ease. He ran the entire briefing the way a man runs something he has run many times before, without hesitation, without notes, without a single moment of uncertainty. Nobody said a word that wasn't asked of them. When it was over, the room emptied fast. Officers moved with their eyes down, conversations barely above a murmur. The air had changed in the building. Everyone could feel it, though no one could have said exactly how to describe it. Ramsay's face throughout the entire briefing had been the color of chalk. In the back row, Brooke Langley let out a long, slow breath. It was the first full breath she had taken all morning. Something had shifted. She could feel it in the room, the way you feel a change in weather. Something was different now. Something had started. She gathered her things and stood at the front of the emptying room. Rowan closed his folder and straightened his notes. He did not look triumphant. He did not look relieved. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had prepared for this moment for a very long time and was only just getting started. The briefing room emptied fast. Officers filed out in clusters, heads down, conversations tight and low. The air had changed in the building. Everybody felt it. Nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Chairs scraped. Boots moved quickly down the hallway. Within minutes, the room was nearly clear. Rowan stood at the front, closing his folder, unhurried. Vance Ramsey was still there. He had hung back near the far wall while the others filtered out, and now he crossed the room with a different walk than the one he'd had this morning, slower, more measured. He had recalibrated somewhere between the door and the podium, and what he was wearing now was a performance of ease, the particular ease of a man who wants you to believe he isn't threatened. He extended his hand. Captain Hale. His voice was warm, practiced. Vance Ramsey. I've been keeping things running around here since Captain Whitaker retired. I wanted to introduce myself properly. Rowan looked at the hand, then he shook it. Sergeant Ramsey, he said. I know who you are. Something moved behind Ramsey's eyes. Brief and quickly buried. Good, good. Well, I just want you to know I'm here to help. I've got a pretty solid handle on how things operate, the relationships, the rhythms. Every precinct's got its own way of doing things, and the Ninth is no different. He smiled. I'd love to bring you up to speed, help you get settled. Rowan nodded once. I appreciate that, Sergeant, he said. I'll call on you when I need you. A pause. Ramsey's smile held perfectly steady. Of course. Doors always open. He left. Rowan watched him go. Then he turned back to his folder and made a small quiet note. Later, Ramsay found Maddox near the equipment lockers. Relax, he said before Maddox could open his mouth. He shook my hand, smiled. Didn't say a word about this morning. He crossed his arms. Man's a pushover. Came in wanting to look reasonable, make a good first impression. He's not going to rock the boat over a creamer cup. He lowered his voice slightly. We play it calm. We play it normal. And he'll spend his first months drowning in paperwork, wondering why nothing works the way he expects it to, just like the others. Maddox exhaled. Ramsay clapped him on the shoulder and walked away. He was smiling again. Rowan opened his office door and leaned into the hallway. Officer Langley. Brooke looked up from her desk. Around her, 2 other officers glanced over briefly, then back at their work. My office, please. She stood, smoothed her uniform, and followed him in. He closed the door behind her. The blinds on the interior window were already angled shut. She stood near the door, hands at her sides, waiting. Rowan went to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer, lifted out a thick manila folder held shut with 2 rubber bands, and set it on the desk between them. Sit down, Officer Langley. She sat. He nodded at the folder. She leaned forward and pulled the rubber bands off and opened it. She went still. Inside was everything. Photographs of incident reports, dated complaint forms with big red dismissed stamps across the top, personnel records with notes in the margins, a full timeline stretching back years, Darius Reed's file complete and flagged with a yellow tab, transfer requests, pattern analyses, names she recognized, dates she recognized, things she had seen firsthand and convinced herself nobody was documenting. All of it documented. I've been building this, Rowan said, before I ever set foot in this building. This morning was part of that. He paused. You watched what happened in the cafeteria. It wasn't a question. Yes, geeks, she said quietly. I need someone on the inside who knows this precinct, someone who has seen what I've documented and can confirm it from direct experience. He slid a second, smaller document across the desk. That is a formal internal affairs cooperation agreement. It protects you legally and places your testimony on an official record. Brooke looked at the document, then up at him. They'll know, she said. If I start talking, Ramsay will figure it out. Yes, Rowan said eventually. That's why the case has to be airtight before he does. She looked down at the agreement. How long have you been doing this? She asked. Coming into places like this. This is my 4th posting like this one, he said simply. I've never lost. She picked up the pen. Through the angled blinds, just barely visible, Vance Ramsey stood motionless in the bullpen outside, watching the closed office door. His smile was completely gone when arrived early, minutes before the first shift. He made coffee in his office, reviewed the duty roster, and had case files open on his desk before most of the building had their coats off. He moved through the precinct the way he always did, quietly, attentively, missing nothing. Vance Ramsey watched him do all of this, and then Ramsey got to work. It started small. That was how Ramsey always started. The precinct's internal mail routing had been quietly adjusted. Administrative reports that should have landed directly on Rowan's desk were now cycling through a secondary processing step, an extra approval layer that Ramsey had inserted into the system under the guise of streamlining the transition period. The result was a backlog, not a dramatic one, not the kind anyone could point to and call a sabotage, just enough friction to keep Rowan buried in paperwork for hours every day. Ramsay had made phone calls to the precinct's union representative, a soft-spoken man named Zachary Phillips, who owed Ramsay favors and knew it. The calls were casual, friendly, the kind of conversation that doesn't sound like anything until you understand what's being planted. Ramsay suggested gently that Rowan's cafeteria visit, arriving unannounced in plain clothes, observing officers without identifying himself, might be worth examining from a protocol standpoint. Just raising questions, he told Phillips. Just making sure the union is aware. Phillips said he'd look into it. Ramsay hung up satisfied. He had found Maddox. Listen to me carefully, Ramsay said, voice low. Back to the wall in the equipment corridor. He didn't write you up yesterday. That means one of two things. Either he's letting it go or he's saving it. He held Maddox's gaze. Either way, you do not apologize. You do not acknowledge this morning in any form. You didn't do anything wrong. You encountered an unidentified individual in a staff-only space and responded accordingly. That's the story. And if he brings it up directly, he won't, Ramsay said. Not yet. He's playing the long game, so we play longer. What Ramsay didn't see was what was happening on the other side of the building. Rowan had scheduled individual orientation meetings with every officer in the precinct. People over days, minutes each, framed as a simple introduction, getting to know the team, understanding the precinct's needs, the kind of thing a new captain does. That was how it looked from the outside. From the inside, each meeting was something else entirely. Rowan sat across from every officer with the same calm, open expression and asked the same careful questions about their experience at the Ninth, about what was working, about what wasn't, about what they wished leadership understood. Most of the senior officers gave him nothing, polite, closed, practiced. They had learned to give nothing. But the junior officers were different. A young officer named Lila Bennett came in for her minutes and left after longer. She spoke carefully at first, then less carefully, then not carefully at all. She described her first months at the Ninth in a steady voice with her hands clasped tight in her lap. Missed promotions with no explanation. A formal complaint she had filed months ago that she'd never received a response to. a shift schedule that seemed designed to isolate her. Rowan listened without interrupting. He took quiet notes. He thanked her when she finished and told her she had done the right thing. She looked at him like she wasn't sure she believed that yet. She was the fourth officer to give him something real. By the end of the day, she was one of 8. That evening, Rowan sat alone in his office with his encrypted tablet and his notebook side by side. The notebook had names now, documented incidents with dates and witnesses, a clear picture of a machine that had been running in the dark for a very long time. He cross-referenced everything against the dossier he had built over the previous period. The patterns lined up exactly. The complaints that were filed and vanished. The officers who left without explanation. Darius Reed at the center of it all, like a wound that had never been treated. He added Lila Bennett's account to the file, then the others. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. In the bullpen outside, the evening shift was clocking in. Voices moved through the building. Doors opened and closed. Ramsay thought he was poisoning the well. What he was actually doing was buying Rowan time. The precinct emptied out. The evening shift took their patrol cars. The day staff went home to their families. The building settled into its nighttime quiet. The hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional crackle of the dispatch radio, the distant sound of traffic through the windows. Rowan stayed. He did this most evenings, not because the work required it, though it often did. He stayed because the building told you different things when it was empty. The paperwork people left unfinished. The filing patterns, the small, revealing details that got covered up during the busy hours when everyone was performing for each other. He poured a fresh coffee, went back to his desk, and opened the personnel file drawer. He pulled out the one at the very back. Darius Reed. He had read it before, in Kane's office, then more at home, alone at his kitchen table with a pen and a yellow legal pad. He knew it well enough to recite the key dates from memory, but reading a file in preparation and reading it while sitting inside the building where it happened were two completely different things. He opened it now and read it like it was the first time. Darius Reed had graduated from the academy, ranked high in his class. His evaluations were exceptional. Instructors used words like instinctive and composed, under pressure and natural leader. He had been assigned to the Ninth Precinct. The first months of his file read like a success story. Commendations for community interventions. A letter of recognition from a Harrove City Elementary School principal. A clean record. No disciplinary actions. Consistent performance reviews marked exceeds expectations. Then the file changed. Reassigned from the North District Patrol Route to the East Side Industrial Corridor, the worst in the precinct. High call, volume, and inadequate backup coverage systematically avoided by senior officers. No explanation noted in the file. First write-up. Failure to complete post-incident documentation within the required window. Rowan looked at the date and cross-referenced it against the duty roster he had quietly pulled. Darius had been working a double shift that day, covering for an officer whose absence was approved by Ramsay personally. Second write-up, insubordination. The details were vague to the point of being meaningless. Failure to comply with supervisory directive with no specifics, no witnesses named, no documentation of what the directive actually was. Formal complaint filed by Darius. Targeted harassment. Discriminatory shift assignments. Hostile work environment. 3 pages, detailed and specific, with dates and incident descriptions. Rowan turned to the next page. The complaint had been routed through the precinct's internal review process. The reviewer was listed as Sergeant Vance Ramsey, finding insufficient evidence to support the claim. Complaint dismissed. Darius had never been notified of the outcome. There was no record of anyone informing him. His copy of the dismissal notice, which protocol required be delivered in person, had never been signed for. Ramsay had buried it without leaving a fingerprint. Darius filed a transfer request. It was denied. The denial was signed by Ramsay. Darius Reed submitted his resignation. 2 sentences. No explanation. No exit interview conducted. The file ended there. Rowan closed it slowly. He sat with it in his hands for a long moment. The building was quiet around him. Somewhere down the hall, a door swung shut on its hinge. He thought about what Kane had told him, working at an auto parts store. Won't return my calls. He thought about a man who had wanted this, who had been high in his class, who had gotten a letter from an elementary school principal, who had put his uniform in a box and tried to pretend the whole thing hadn't happened because fighting it felt like throwing himself at a wall that didn't move. Rowan set the file on the desk. He picked up his pen and turned to a fresh page in his notebook. He wrote Darius's name at the top. Beneath it, he began a clean, organized summary of every documented incident. Dates, file references, cross-references to other officers' accounts. Precise, thorough, the kind of documentation that couldn't be dismissed. He thought about calling Darius. He decided against it. The case wasn't strong enough yet. Bringing Darius in too early meant exposing him before the protection was fully in place. When he called, the ground needed to be solid. He owed Darius Reed that much. He worked late. Then he locked the file in his desk, turned off the light, and walked out through a building that had no idea what was coming. Rowan was at his desk early. He ran the morning briefing. Clean, professional, no drama. He assigned patrol rotations, reviewed an open case file with a junior detective, and spent hours conducting the final orientation meetings with the last group of officers he hadn't reached yet. He was back at his desk. He was reading through a stack of misdirected administrative reports, the ones Ramsay's rerouting had delayed, when his phone rang. It was Kane. "Turn on the news," she said. "Channel 4. Vance Ramsey made his call from the precinct parking lot, not from his desk, not from his personal office, from the far corner of the lot near the equipment bay, where the outdoor cameras didn't reach. He stood with his back to the building and his collar turned up against the cold, and he dialed Victor Langston's private cell phone number. Langston picked up. "We have a problem," Ramsay said. He talked. He laid it out carefully. Hale's appointment, the cafeteria, the individual officer meetings that were clearly not just orientation sessions. He told Langston about the cooperation agreement he suspected was circulating. He told him about Brooke Langley spending time behind a closed door with the new captain on day 1. "I need noise," Ramsay said. "Public noise. Something that makes him look like the problem before he can make me look like the problem." Langston was quiet for a moment. "Leave it with me," he said. Councilman Victor Langston was silver-haired and wore the particular polish of a man who had spent decades making problems disappear for the right people. He chaired the city's police funding committee, which meant the Ninth Precinct's budget ran through his hands every fiscal year. He and Ramsay had an arrangement that was never written down and never needed to be. Ramsay kept the Ninth running the way Langston needed it to run quietly, without the kind of headlines that created oversight committees, and Langston kept the money flowing and the questions minimal. It was a clean arrangement. Hale threatened to make it very messy. Langston had called community board members and a local television producer he had known for years. He had scheduled a community meeting under the banner of Public Safety Accountability Forum. The invitations went out through the City Council's official communication channels, which gave it the appearance of legitimacy. Channel 4 had a camera crew in the meeting room. Rowan watched it from his office with the volume low. Langston stood at a podium before a half-filled community room, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling civic concern. He talked about the importance of leadership continuity at the Ninth Precinct. He talked about the community's relationship with their local officers. And then, with the practiced ease of a man who had been planting suggestions his whole career, he raised his concerns about the selection process that had produced the Ninth Precinct's new commanding officer. Our community deserves leadership with deep local roots, Langston said, looking directly into the camera. Leadership that understands the specific challenges of Harrow City, not appointments made in back rooms by people with political agendas. He never said Rowan's name directly. He didn't need to. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Questions surround new Ninth Precinct captain's appointment." Rowan turned the television off. He called Kane. "Langston chairs the funding committee," she said before he could speak. "He's politically untouchable right now. Taking a direct run at him would create more noise than it solves." "I know," Rowan said. "He's trying to delegitimize you before you can build traction, make you look like the controversy so nobody looks at Ramsay. I know that too." A pause. "So what do you do?" "Nothing," Rowan said. "Not yet." He hung up. He opened his notebook to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote 2 words, "Political infrastructure." Beneath that, in clean, even letters, Victor Langston. He looked at the name for a long moment. Langston thought this was about a job title, about a rejected application, and a bruised ego, and a political appointment he wanted reversed. He thought this was small. He had no idea what was actually inside the folder sitting in Rowan's locked desk drawer. He had no idea how long Rowan had been building it or what it would look like when it was finished. Rowan kept his pen. He went back to work. The precinct was nearly empty. A skeleton crew ran the overnight desk. 2 officers were out on late patrol. The hallways were dim, the building breathing a slow nighttime breath. The hum of servers in the equipment room, the distant squawk of the dispatch radio, the occasional creak of the old heating system working against the cold. Brooke Langley sat alone at a terminal in the records room with a cup of cold coffee and a growing sense of unease. Her authorized access to the precinct's historical complaints database had been granted at Rowan's request, quietly processed through official channels that afternoon. On paper, she was conducting a routine records audit, the kind of administrative task that nobody looked twice at. In practice, she was working her way backward through years of filed complaints, cross-referencing dismissal dates, reviewer signatures, and routing logs. Every thread led to the same place, every single one. She had been at it when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She minimized her screen without thinking about it. The footsteps passed. She exhaled. She was reaching for her coffee when she noticed the light. Ramsay's office was directly across the hall from the records room. It was always locked. She had never once seen that door open when Ramsay wasn't physically present. But right now, the door was standing open, and the desk lamp inside was on. She sat very still. She could hear him somewhere down the hall. The men's room, she thought, from the direction of his footsteps. She didn't move. Then she stood up slowly, crossed the hallway, and looked through the gap in the door. The office was cluttered the way powerful men's offices get cluttered, not from disorganization, but from accumulation, years of favors and files, and the comfortable mess of a man who never expected anyone to go through his things. The desk was covered in papers, and there, half hidden beneath a manila folder on the left side of the desk, was a locked metal drawer that had been left slightly ajar. Protruding from the lock, barely an inch, just the end of it, was a small black USB drive, personal, unmarked, completely separate from any department system. Brooke's heart was beating very fast. She did not touch the door. She did not step inside. She pulled her phone from her pocket, angled it through the gap, and took 3 photographs. The drawer, the drive, the full desk in context, clean and clear. She was back at her terminal with her screen restored when Ramsay's footsteps came back down the hall. She heard his office door pull shut. The lock clicked. She stared at her screen without reading it. Then she opened her messages and texted Rowan 2 words and the 3 photographs. His office. He arrived in minutes. Civilian clothes, no markings. He came through the side entrance without announcement and found her in the records room. She showed him the photographs on her phone. He looked at them without speaking. He expanded the image of the drive, studied it, then set the phone down on the table between them. He went very still in the way she was beginning to recognize, not hesitation, but the particular quiet of a man running calculations faster than he was letting on. A personal drive kept completely off department systems, he said finally. Locked separately from his main files, he paused. That's either Ramsay's insurance policy or it's evidence of something we haven't found yet. How do we get it legally? Internal affairs subpoena, possibly a warrant. He looked at her, which means bringing more people into this before I'm ready. More exposure, more risk. Brooke understood what he wasn't saying. Every additional person in the circle was another potential leak. And one leak was all Ramsay needed. So what do? We document what you found exactly as you found it. And we wait until the case is strong enough that the subpoena is airtight. He picked up her phone and handed it back. You did everything right tonight. She nodded. She gathered her things. They walked out together through the side door into the parking lot. The cold hit them immediately. Brooke stopped. Both front tires of her car were flat, not slowly deflated, slashed clean. The cuts were deliberate and deep. She looked at them for a moment without speaking. There's no camera on this corner, she said quietly. No, Rowan said. There isn't. He took out his phone and photographed the tires methodically, close-up, wide angle, the surrounding lot. He checked his watch and made a call to the city fleet manager's emergency line requesting camera installation at the northeast corner of the lot. Official channels on the record time-stamped. He hung up and looked at her. They're guessing, he said. They don't know what you've told me. This is a warning based on suspicion, not information. Does that make it better? He met her eyes. No, it makes them sloppy. And sloppy people make mistakes. They can't walk back. He drove her to her sister's house. Neither of them said much along the way. Rowan noticed it the moment he walked through the front door. It was subtle, the kind of shift you felt before you could name it. Officers who had been keeping their eyes down all week made brief direct contact as he passed. A junior officer held the equipment room door open for him without being asked. The usual cluster that formed around Ramsay's corner of the bullpen was thinner this morning, the orbit looser, small things. But Rowan had built careers out of reading small things. He set 2 folders on his desk. One was the completed internal affair referral, pages, fully documented, cross-referenced, airtight. The other was a sealed envelope addressed to Deputy Chief Kane. He placed them both in the center of his desk, squared them up, and went to run the briefing. Ramsay showed up for the briefing, but had nowhere to stand. Rowan was already at the podium when the room filled. He ran it the way he had run every briefing this week, clean, direct, thorough, shift assignments, patrol updates, case reviews. He asked specific questions of specific officers and listened to the answers fully, which was something this room hadn't seen in a long time. Ramsay sat in his usual chair and had nothing to do with any of it. He tried to interject twice, small things framed as helpful additions. Rowan acknowledged both with a brief nod and continued without incorporating either, not dismissively, not rudely, simply without yielding any ground. By the time the briefing ended, Ramsay looked like a man sitting in a chair that had been moved inches to the left of where it was supposed to be. Nothing dramatic, just wrong enough to be felt. Officers stopped Rowan into the hallway afterward, not together, separately, one after another. Each one found a quiet moment, a stretch of empty corridor, and said some version of the same thing. The first was Officer Jared Quinn. He stopped Rowan near the water fountain and spoke quickly, quietly, like a man who had been working up to this for days. He described a pattern of assignments deliberately designed to set him up to fail. Impossible quotas, inadequate backup, write-ups that appeared in his file without warning. He hadn't filed a complaint. He hadn't known if there was any point. The second was a woman named Officer Selena Brooks. She handed Rowan a folded piece of paper, a copy of a complaint she had filed, personally routed to Ramsay, never heard of again. She had kept her copy because something had told her to. The third said only sentences, asked for nothing, and walked away. Rowan added all of it to the file. Kane arrived. She came without announcement through the back entrance in plain clothes, a gray coat, and a leather portfolio under her arm. Rowan met her in his office and closed the door. He slid the referral across the desk. She read it the way she read everything, thoroughly, without expression, turning each page with the same controlled attention. It took her minutes. Rowan drank his coffee and waited. When she finished, she closed the folder and set it flat on the desk. She looked at him. "This is enough," she said. "Oh, I know. I can have formal suspension paperwork drawn up." "We move on, Ramsay. First thing. Badge, sidearm, administrative hold pending full investigation. The harassment record goes to HR and the union simultaneously." She paused. "He won't see it coming." "No," Rowan said. "He won't." She studied him for a moment. "How are you doing?" He considered the question. "Ask me Friday afternoon." She almost smiled. She gathered the referral into her portfolio and stood. "First thing," she said. "First thing," he confirmed. After she left, Rowan sat alone in his office for a few minutes. The building moved around him. Phones, footsteps, the ordinary sounds of a working precinct. He opened his desk drawer and took out Darius Reed's file. He set it on the desk in front of him and looked at it. He thought about a man at an auto parts store who had stopped believing anything would happen. He let himself feel it just for a moment, the quiet, solid satisfaction of a thing nearly finished. Then he put the file away. He sealed the referral envelope. He locked it in the bottom drawer of his desk and turned the key. Outside the glass across the bullpen, Vance Ramsey stood completely motionless, watching the office door. Rowan turned off his desk lamp and went back to work. Rowan's phone rang late. He was still at his desk. The building was dark except for the lamp in his office and the blue glow of the overnight dispatch terminal down the hall. He had been reviewing Brooks' photographs of the USB drive one more time, thinking about timelines, thinking about warrants, thinking about how much longer he needed before the net was fully closed. He looked at the screen. Kane, he picked up. Her voice was different, clipped, controlled in the specific way of someone who had received very bad news and was managing it with both hands. "We have a problem." He set down his pen. "Tell me." She talked. He listened without interrupting. He sat completely still in his chair with one hand flat on the desk and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, processing everything she said with the same careful attention he gave to everything. Not reacting, not catastrophizing, just taking it in. The structure of what had happened became clear quickly. Ramsay had moved first. He had contacted Councilman Langston. Langston had spent the time working his connections at the city level, calling in debts, applying pressure through channels that never appeared in any official record. The deputy commissioner's office had quietly signed a bureaucratic restructuring order. The internal affairs unit assigned to receive Rowan's referral had been pulled and reassigned to a district reorganization project. Administrative language buried in routine paperwork, signed when nobody was paying close attention. The replacement unit, Kane said, it's the Northside Division. They have a history with the Ninth. Rowan knew what that meant. He had read those records too. Complaints refer to Northside IA. Findings of insufficient evidence. Clean as a whistle every time. There's more, Kane said. Of course there was. Someone tipped Ramsay about the referral. I don't know who, and I don't know when, but he knew it was coming. A pause. He filed a formal union grievance. Claims your observation, arriving in plain clothes, failing to identify yourself as commanding officer, constituted deliberate psychological manipulation and created undue stress for department personnel. The room was very quiet. He's calling it entrapment, she said. He's calling my first day on the job entrapment, Rowan said flatly. He's calling it whatever word makes the union move fastest. Another pause, heavier than the last. Rowan, Carver, and Holt have signed supporting statements. Officers total. The grievance is already filed. Rowan closed his eyes for seconds. Then he opened them. The union is backing it. The union is reviewing it, which at this stage means the same thing. And Langston, she stopped. Langston's brother-in-law is the deputy commissioner. There it was, the full shape of it. Not just Ramsay, not just Langston. The deputy commissioner himself, connected by blood and aligned by interest, signing the paperwork that surgically removed the one channel designed to receive everything Rowan had built. Kane continued, Langston will be on the news calling for a formal review of your appointment. The union will be citing the grievance publicly. And the deputy commissioner, she stopped again. We'll back them both, Rowan said. Yes. The silence that followed had weight to it. Rowan looked at the sealed envelope in his desk drawer. Pages, years of documented abuse. Every complaint, every suppressed transfer, every name, every date, all of it real, all of it thorough, all of it completely useless without a legitimate channel to receive it. Ramsay hadn't beaten the evidence. He had beaten the system that was supposed to process it. Go home, Kane said quietly. Get some rest. We'll figure this out. Yes, Rowan said. Good night, Valerie. He hung up. He sat in the lamplight without moving for a long time. The building was silent around him. The referral envelope sat in the locked drawer from his right hand. The same envelope he had sealed with such quiet satisfaction just hours ago, certain that would be the beginning of the end. He had been right about that, just not in the way he had expected. He reached over and turned off the desk lamp. In the darkness of his office, in an empty building with a case that could not currently be filed, Rowan Hale sat very still in thought. He thought for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and scrolled to a number he had not dialed yet. Darius Reed. His thumb hovered over the screen. He pressed call. Darius Reed picked up. His voice was thick with sleep and something older than sleep, a weariness that had settled into him, the way things settle when they've been there long enough to stop feeling like a choice. Hello, Darius? Rowan kept his voice quiet and steady. My name is Rowan Hale. I'm the new captain at the Ninth Precinct. Silence. Not the silence of a man who had fallen back asleep. The silence of a man who had gone very still on the other end of the line. I've read your file, Rowan continued. All of it. Every complaint, every write-up, every date. He paused. I know what they did to you in that building. The silence stretched. Then Darius Reed said, I wondered when somebody would call. They talked. Rowan sat at his kitchen table in the dark with a cup of coffee going cold beside him and his notebook open in front of him. And he listened the way he had trained himself to listen over his career, completely without rushing, without filling the quiet spaces with his own voice. Darius talked slowly at first, carefully, the way you talk about something that hurt you badly when you're not yet sure the person on the other end deserves the full truth of it. He talked about his first months at the Ninth, the commendations, the school letter, the genuine belief that he had found the place where he was supposed to be. Then he talked about what came after the patrol reassignments, the write-ups that appeared in his file like ambushes, the complaint he filed that vanished without a response, the transfer request that came back denied, the morning he sat in his car outside the precinct and then drove home instead of going in. I kept journals, Darius said. Rowan looked up from his notebook. What kind of journals? Personal ones, dated entries, every incident, every conversation, every time something happened that I knew was wrong. A pause. I wrote them because I didn't know what else to do with it. I couldn't sleep. I'd come home and write it all down just to get it out of my head. His voice was flat and factual, the voice of a man describing something he had processed 1,000 times already. I never filed them. I didn't think anyone would listen. I'm listening, Rowan said. Another silence, longer this time. I have a daughter, Darius said. She's 4. Her name is Amara. He stopped. I need you to tell me this is real, that something is actually going to happen this time, and I'm not just, it's real, Rowan said. But I need to ask something difficult. Ask it. I need you to come back to the building, not tonight. In uniform. He waited. I know what I'm asking. The silence on the other end was the longest yet. You want me to walk back in there? Darius said quietly. Yes. In front of all of them. Yes. Rowan heard him breathe once slowly in and out. Tell me what you have, Darius said. Rowan told him. Not everything. Not the operational details, not the names he was still protecting, but enough. The dossier, the documented pattern, the years of suppressed complaints, the scope of what was coming. When he finished, Darius was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said finally. Okay, tell me what time. Rowan hung up and sat with the phone in his hand. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he had added and hoped he wouldn't need to use this soon. Special Agent Naomi Reyes, U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. He had sent her the preliminary dossier as a precaution when Kane first approached him, and the full scope of what he was walking into had become clear. He hadn't been certain the case would reach federal territory. He was certain now. The moment Langston's brother-in-law signed that a reassignment order, the case crossed the line. Interfering with an active civil rights inquiry, even through bureaucratic maneuvering, even with clean hands and administrative language, was a federal matter. He pressed call. She picked up. She had been awake. Rowan, she said simply. The IA unit was pulled, he said. Signed by the deputy commissioner, Langston's brother-in-law. A pause, brief and precise. That's obstruction, she said. Yes. Of a federal civil rights inquiry. Yes. He heard the click of a lamp, the sound of paper moving. The door just opened, Reyes said. Rowan looked out his kitchen window at the dark, empty street. Be at the Ninth Precinct, he said. Use the front entrance. We'll be there, she said. He hung up. He closed his notebook. He did not sleep. Rowan arrived in full dress uniform, gold bars, polished shoes, every crease sharp enough to cut. He walked through the front entrance of the Ninth Precinct, with his shoulders back and his face composed, and he went directly to the briefing room where he stood at the front and waited. He didn't pace. He didn't check his watch. He stood, the way he had stood his entire career, like a man who had already decided how things were going to go and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Officers began filtering in. They came in pairs and clusters, mid-conversation, coffee in hand, still half asleep. One by one, they registered him at the front of the room in full dress uniform, and the conversations dropped off and the room filled in quietly. Ramsay arrived. He came through the door, already carrying confidence like a weapon. Back-channel confirmation had reached him through the union that the removal review was set. Langston was prepared to make a statement. The deputy commissioner's office was ready to move. He expected to walk into a room with a cornered man at the front of it. He found Rowan Hale standing at the podium like he owned the building because he did. Ramsay took his seat. His expression gave away nothing. But Rowan watched his eyes make a quick calculation, a rapid reassessment of the room, the uniform, the posture, and come up uncertain for the first time. Good. Brooke Langley came in and took a seat near the back. She looked at Rowan briefly. He gave her nothing, but she understood. Deputy Chief Kane entered through the side door in full dress uniform and positioned herself to the right of the podium without a word. Several officers straightened involuntarily in their seats. Rowan heard the front door of the precinct open. The room didn't hear them coming. It felt them. A change in the air near the hallway entrance. A shift in the building's atmosphere, like pressure changing before a storm. Then the briefing room door opened and 3 people walked in displaying federal credentials. Special Agent Naomi Reyes was compact and precise, with the bearing of a woman who had spent years in federal courtrooms and had never once lost her footing in one. She wore a dark suit and carried a leather portfolio, and she walked to the side of the room without hurrying and without looking at anyone in particular, which somehow made everyone in the room look at her. Her 2 DOJ colleagues positioned themselves near the door. The room was completely silent. Then the door opened a second time. Darius Reed walked in. He wore his old dress uniform, pressed and straight, the crease in the trousers sharp, the shoes mirror bright. He had clearly spent time on it. He stood in the doorway for just a moment, and Rowan could see what it cost him to be here in this building, in front of these people. He could see it in the set of his jaw and the way his hands stayed perfectly still at his sides through what had to be an enormous act of will. He found a place to stand near the left wall. His eyes moved once across the room and settled on Ramsay. Ramsay looked back at him, and something passed across his face that he couldn't fully suppress. A flash of something raw and ugly, there and gone in an instant. Rowan stepped to the podium. "Good morning," he said. "Before we begin, I have some introductions to make." He introduced Reyes and her colleagues. He stated her title and her division clearly and without drama. "The way you state facts that don't require decoration." Reyes stepped forward. "The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has opened a formal federal investigation into this precinct," she said. Her voice was measured and absolute. "The investigation covers systematic civil rights violations, racially discriminatory conduct, targeted harassment of officers, suppression of formal complaints, and obstruction of a civil rights inquiry." She looked at the room without expression. "This investigation is now active and federal in jurisdiction." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Nobody moved. Rowan turned slightly. "Officer Reed," he said quietly, "would you like to say anything?" Darius Reed looked directly at Vance Ramsey. His voice, when it came, was steady and clear and left no room for misunderstanding. "I came back to make sure my daughter grows up in a city where this doesn't happen to the next one." The room was silent enough to hear the lights hum. Nobody spoke for a long moment after Darius sat down. The silence was enormous. It pressed down on the room like a physical weight, filling every corner, settling over every officer like a judgment they couldn't escape. Men who had laughed in the cafeteria sat with their eyes fixed on the table in front of them. Men who had signed their names to Ramsay's grievance without a second thought sat at the wall like they were looking for a door that wasn't there. Nobody looked at Ramsay. Ramsay looked at nothing. Deputy Chief Kane stepped forward. She held a single sheet of paper in her right hand. She moved to the front of the room with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who understood that speed would rob this moment of what it deserved. She had waited a long time for this. She was not going to rush it. Sergeant Vance Ramsey. The name landed like a stone dropped in still water. Ramsay looked up. His face had gone somewhere that faces go when every defense a man has built collapses at the same moment. A rigid, terrible blankness like a building the second after the walls come down and before the dust has settled. He was performing composure. His body was betraying him anyway. Effective immediately, Kane said, her voice filling every inch of the room. You are placed on administrative suspension pending the outcome of the federal civil rights investigation, opened this morning by the Department of Justice. You will surrender your badge and your sidearm before leaving this building. She stopped speaking. The room waited. Ramsay stood. The movement was slow and stiff, like a man whose body had aged in the last minutes. He straightened his jacket with both hands. A habit, muscle memory, something to do with his hands while the room watched. He reached to his belt and unclipped his badge and stood there for just a moment, holding it in his palm. He set it on the table. The sound it made, that small, flat, metallic click against the surface, was the loudest thing in the room. Several officers flinched at it without meaning to. He unholstered his sidearm. He cleared it with the mechanical efficiency of long practice and placed it beside the badge. His hands were shaking, both of them. A fine, uncontrollable tremor that ran from his wrists to his fingertips and did not stop. He stepped back from the table. He straightened his jacket again, that same useless gesture, his hands needing somewhere to go, and he walked toward the door. His back was straight. His face was empty. He didn't look at Maddox. He didn't look at Carver. He didn't look at Holt, who had laughed the loudest and was now staring at her own hands in her lap like she didn't recognize them. He didn't look at Darius Reed, but he passed within feet of him on the way to the door. Darius didn't move, didn't speak, stood absolutely still with his hands at his sides, and watched Ramsay pass with an expression that carried years of a man's life in it, years of the worst kind of quiet, the kind that settles over you when you've been told over and over by the weight of institutional silence that what happened to you didn't matter. It mattered. The door swung shut behind Ramsay with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Special Agent Naomi Reyes stepped forward. She opened her portfolio with both hands and looked at the room, not searching for anyone, not avoiding anyone, just looking. The look of a woman who had walked into many rooms like this one and understood exactly what they were. Officer Trent Maddox. Maddox looked up from the table, and for one unguarded second, his face was completely open. Stripped of the grin, stripped of the performance, stripped of everything that had been built on. What was underneath it was something much smaller than the man who had stood over Rowan with a creamer cup and an audience at his back. You are hereby formally charged with conduct unbecoming an officer, assault under color of law, and violation of the civil rights of a commanding officer. Reyes' voice didn't rise or fall. It didn't need to. Every word was a wall. These charges have been filed with the Department of Justice and are supported by documented evidence, time-stamped records, eyewitness accounts, and the sworn statement of Captain Rowan Hale. You are suspended without pay effective immediately. You will surrender your credentials before leaving this building. Maddox's mouth opened. Something started to come out of it. A protest, a reflex, the last automatic reach for a world where he could still talk his way out of something. The look on Reyes's face stopped it cold. He stood up. His fingers fumbled with the badge pin once, twice, 3 times before it came free. He set it on the table with a hand that couldn't quite hold steady. He didn't look at Rowan. He looked at nothing. The same way Ramsay had looked at nothing. The same vacancy that descends on men when the thing they built their identity around is taken away in front of witnesses. He walked out. The door swung shut again. Carver and Holt came next. When Reyes spoke their names, Carver's jaw worked like a man trying to chew through something too hard for his teeth. He was informed that his signed statement, the one he had put his name on without hesitation to help bury a captain who had done nothing wrong, had been flagged as potential evidence of coordinated retaliation against a commanding officer. Federal evidence now in a federal case. His face collapsed through expressions. Holt said nothing. She sat with both hands flat on the table, pressing down like she needed to feel something solid. And she stared at a fixed point on the wall, and she did not cry, but it was close. She had laughed. She had sat at that table, and she had laughed, and she had known on some level, the way you always know, even when you choose not to, that it was wrong. Now the bill had come. The consequences reached City Hall. Councilman Langston's attorney called with language that made Langston sit down mid-sentence. Federal obstruction, not a city matter, not something managed quietly through a funding committee. The IA reassignment, the move Langston had been so proud of, so certain was clean, had been identified in the federal case file, and it was sitting in front of people who did not owe Victor Langston anything at all. He canceled the press conference. He did not return calls for the rest of the day. The Deputy Commissioner's Office released a public statement of full support for the DOJ investigation. His brother-in-law's name did not appear in it. The briefing room emptied slowly, like water finding its way out. Junior officers filed past Rowan with expression he hadn't seen from them, something open, something cautious but real. A few made eye contact. One nodded. One, a young officer Rowan recognized from his orientation meetings, stopped briefly beside Darius Reed on the way out and said quietly, "I'm glad you came back." Darius looked at him for a moment. "Me too," he said. Brooke Langley was last. She stood in the doorway and looked back at the room, at the empty chairs, at the table that had held so many years of silence and complicity, at Rowan, who stood at the front with his hands loose at his sides and his uniform straight, and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has finished something that needed finishing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked out into the hallway, and for the first time in years at the Ninth Precinct, she didn't brace herself as she went. She just walked. The precinct was quieter than Rowan had ever heard it, not empty. The phones still rang. The dispatch radio still crackled. Officers still moved through the hallways with cases to work and shifts to complete. But the particular noise that had defined this building, the performative loudness, the laughter that was really something else wearing different clothes, was gone. The air itself felt different, cleaner somehow, like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed for a very long time. Rowan sat across from Kane in his office, with 2 cups of coffee between them, and the afternoon light coming through the blinds in long flat lines across the floor. She told him about the reform package, mandatory body cameras for all precinct interactions, not just street patrol, but inside the building itself. A fully restructured complaints process that routed directly to an independent oversight board, bypassing the precinct chain of command entirely. A new community accountability panel with real authority and real teeth, and a formal implementation committee to build all of it from the ground up. The city wants you to chair it, Kane said. Rowan looked at his coffee. They want it done right, she continued, and they know what right looks like now, he nodded slowly. She opened her portfolio and set a single page on the desk between them. He looked at it without picking it up. Officers who had filed transfer requests from this precinct withdrew them this week, she said voluntarily. No prompting. He read the names on the page, all of them. He recognized everyone from orientation meetings, from hallway conversations, from the careful, frightened way they had moved through this building at the start of the week, including Brooke Langley. He sat with that for a moment. That, he said quietly, is the whole win right there. Kane looked at him. The federal case, the suspensions, the charges. That's not the win. That's the consequence, Rowan said. The win is the people who decided to stay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she closed her portfolio and stood. Get some rest this weekend, Rowan. Yes, ma'am, he said. She almost smiled. He found Brooke at her desk minutes later. The bullpen was half full, the afternoon shift settling in. He stopped beside her desk and waited until she looked up. My office, he said. Minutes. She came in and he closed the door and remained standing. He didn't go behind the desk. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at her directly. What you did this week, he said, is formally noted in the federal record. Your cooperation, your courage, and your judgment, all of it on record. She absorbed that with a short nod. There's something else, he said. He pulled a single sheet from his desk and held it out to her. I'm recommending you for the detective track. This is the formal application. She took it. She looked at it for a long moment. I want to be clear, Rowan said. This is not a reward for what you did this week. I've watched you. The way you think, the way you move through a situation, the way you read people. He paused. You should have been on this track years ago. Brooke looked at the page. She pressed her lips together for a moment. My mother, she said finally, is going to lose her mind. Something moved across Rowan's face that was almost, not quite, but almost a smile. Tell her she raised someone worth bragging about, he said. Rowan carried a lunch tray from the cafeteria line and walked to the far end of the room. He sat down at the steel table near the far wall. The same table, the same seat, the tray in front of him, the notebook beside it, the coffee, black and hot. Everything was exactly as it had been, except the creamer cups at the condiment station, and the sound of the room and the weight of the air, and the fact that Vance Ramsey was not standing in the doorway, watching with a smile on his face. Rowan set his fork down beside his tray and looked at the table for a moment. He picked up his fork. The cafeteria door opened and Brooke Langley walked through with her own tray. She crossed the room without being asked, without ceremony, and sat down across from him. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. They sat in comfortable silence. Then the door opened again. Officer Jared Quinn stood in the entrance with his lunch tray, looking at Rowan with the particular uncertainty of a young man who wasn't sure of the rules of a world that had just changed. He had not laughed. He had not signed his name to anything. He had sat in orientation and spoken carefully and honestly and hoped in the quiet way that young people hope that someone was actually listening. Rowan looked up. Plenty of room, Officer Quinn, he said. Quinn crossed the cafeteria and sat down. 2 more officers followed him through the door a moment later. Officer Lila Bennett, who had spent time in Rowan's office telling the truth about her months at the Ninth, and a young officer named Brooks, who had handed Rowan a folded piece of paper in the hallway and asked for nothing in return. They sat down without being asked. The table filled. Rowan looked at it for just a moment at the faces around him, At this ordinary steel table, in this ordinary cafeteria, in a building that had been a place where cruelty had a uniform and silence was the price of survival. He picked up his fork. He ate. And outside the cafeteria windows, Harrow City moved through its afternoon, unaware, unhurried, carrying on, while inside the Ninth Precinct, something that had been broken for a very long time quietly finally began to heal. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one on the screen. I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.